Welcome to episode 22 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we will continue with the adventures of Heracles, or Hercules in Roman. The first adventures of Heracles. The apparitions vanished, and Heracles was alone. He determined to walk the path of virtue, and soon found an opportunity to do a good deed. At that time, Greece was still covered with forests and swamps inhabited by savage lions, raging boars, and other dangerous beasts. To clear the country of these monsters and to free it from the robbers who lay in wait for the travelers in lonely places was one of the great goals of the heroes of old. Heracles was destined to continue this work. When he returned to his people, he learned that a fierce lion had his lair on Mount Cithæron, at whose foot the herds of King Amphitryon were pastured. The young hero, Virtue's words still ringing in his ears, made a quick decision. He armed himself, scaled the wild wooded mountain, overcame the lion, flung the skin over his shoulder, and set the gaping jaws on his head as a helmet. As he was returning from his quest, he met the herald of Ergius, king of the Mycenae, who had come for the shameful and unjust yearly tribute expected from the Thebans. Heracles, who was now regarded himself as the champion for all the oppressed, made short work of the messengers, who were already guilty of many abuses, and sent them back to their king mutilated and with ropes around their necks. Ergius demanded that the culprit be delivered to him at once, and Creon, king of Thebes, was inclined to obey for fear of the great power. But Heracles persuaded a number of brave youths to go against the enemy with him. In no dwelling, however, were arms to be found, for the minions had removed all of the weapons, lest the Thebans revolt. Then Athene summoned Heracles to her temple, and fitted him with armor of her own, while the youths took from the temple the weapons their fathers had won in conquest and dedicated to the gods. Thus equipped, the hero and his little group of men marched toward the minions until they reached a narrow pass where the vast army of the foe was of no avail. Ergius himself fell in the fight, and his entire host was beaten and dispersed. But in the fray, valiant Amphitryon, the stepfather of Heracles, died of a fatal wound. After the battle was over, Heracles swiftly advanced toward the Ochomenus, the capital of the Mycenae, and forced his way through the gates, burned the king's palace, and destroyed the city. All Greece admired his extraordinary courage, and Creon, the king of Thebes, rewarded him by giving him his daughter Megara to wife. Later, she bore him 3 sons. His mother, Alcmene, married again, taking her a second husband, the judge Rhadamanus. Even the immortals showered gifts upon the victorious demigod. Hermes gave him a sword, Apollo arrows, Hephaestus a golden quiver, and Athene a brazen cuirass. Heracles fights the giants. The hero soon had an opportunity to make the gods generous return for the precious gifts they had given him. The giant creatures were frightful faces, long hair and beards, and scaly dragon tails instead of feet, were monsters whom Gaia, the earth, had borne Uranus, the sky god. Now their mother stirred them up against Zeus, the new ruler of the world, because he had banished her elder sons, the Titans, to Tartarus. And so they rushed forth from Eurybus, the underworld, to the broad fields of Phrygia in Thessaly. The very stars paled at the sight of them, and Phoebus Apollo turned his sun-chariot in the other direction. "Go and avenge me the children of the older gods," said Mother Earth. "An eagle is tearing at Prometheus, a vulture at Titus. Atlas is sentenced to carry the sky, and the Titans languish in chains. Avenge them. Come to their rescue. Use my own limbs, the mountains, for rungs and weapons. Ascend to those starry halls. You, Typhus, snatch scepter and thunderbolt from the hands of Zeus. Enceladus, you conquer the sea and drive Poseidon from his stronghold. Rhodas shall tear the reins from the hands of the sun god, and Porphyrion over the oracle of Delphi." At her words, the giants burst into deafening applause, as though they had already won the victory and were leading Poseidon or Ares in the triumphal procession, or dragging Apollo away by his beautiful locks. One spoke as though Aphrodite were even now his wife. Another planned to woo Artemis. A third, Athene. Confident and rejoicing, they went toward the mountains of Thessaly, from whence they intended to storm Olympus. In the meantime, Iris, the messenger of the gods, called together all those in the high heavens and those who dwell in rivers and springs. She even summoned the Fates from the underworld. Persephone left her realm of shadowy shapes, and her husband, the king of the silent dead, yoked his steeds that shunned the light and drove them up toward shining Olympus. As in a besieged city whose dwellers stream from all sides to defend the citadel, so the throng of immortals assembled at their father's hearth. "You, who have come together here," as Zeus addressed them, "see how Gaia is conspiring against us with that new brood of hers. On with you, and see it that every one of her sons she sends against us, you send her back a dead body." When the father of the gods had ended, a great clap of thunder rang out from the sky, and Gaia answered with a mighty earthquake from below. Nature lapsed into chaos, and all things were as confused as when they were first created. For the giants tore one mountain after another out of the roots. They piled Ossa and Pelnon, Ota and Athos, one on top of the other. They plucked out Rhodo with half the source of Hebrus, and when they had climbed their ponderous ladder to the very seat of the gods, they set out to storm Olympus with huge boulders and whole oaks of firebrands. An oracle had told the gods that they would not slay a single giant unless a mortal fought on their side. Gaia knew this, and so she cast about for a way to make her sons invulnerable to mortal men. And there was an herb which could have accomplished this, but Zeus had stole a march on her. He forbade the dawn, the moon, and the sun to shine, and while Gaia groped about in the darkness, he himself quickly cut the herbs and had Athene summon his son Hercules to take part in the fight. On Olympus, the gods were already in the midst of the struggle. Ares had guided his war chariot and its snorting steeds into the very thick of the onrushing foe. His golden shield burned brighter than flame, and the crest on his helmet streamed in the wind. He slew the giant Pelorus, whose feet were live serpents, and drove his wheels over the writhing limbs of his falling adversary. But not until he beheld mortal Hercules, who had just mounted the last step to Olympus, did the monster yield up his 3 souls. Hercules glanced about the field and selected a mark for his bow. His arrow fell. Alcyoneus, who plunged down that great height, but rose with great vigor the moment he touched the ground. At Athene's advice, Heracles too descended, and lifted the giant from the earth which had borne him. The instant he was suspended in an alien element, he breathed his last. Now, the giant Porphyrion took a threatening step towards Heracles and Hera at once in order to fight them one by one. But swiftly, Zeus roused his desires to look upon the divine face of the goddess, and while he was still tugging at the veil with which she had covered herself, the father of the gods struck him with a thunderbolt, and Heracles finished the work with one of his arrows. Soon after this, the giant Phaealtes stepped out from the ranks of his brothers and looked ahead with enormous flashing eyes. "What glittering goals for our arrows," said Heracles to Phoebus Apollo, who was fighting at his side, and shot the right eye from the giant's head, while the sun god struck the left. A hailstorm of glowing iron from the hand of Hephaestus threw Clitus to the ground. Pallas Athene hurled the island of Sicily upon the fleeing Enceladus. The giant polyboats, whose Poseidon pursued across the sea, fled to Cos, but the sea god tore off a piece of the island and covered him with it. Hermes, who wore Pinto's helmet on his head, slew Hippolytus, and the Fates destroyed 2 others with their brazen clubs. The rest Zeus mowed down with lightning, or Heracles shot with his arrows. For these deeds the immortals held the demigod in high favor. Those among the gods who had helped in the fight Zeus called Olympians, a term meant to distinguish the brave from the cowards. 2 of his own sons, born of mortal women, were also considered worthy to bear his name of honor, Dionysus and Heracles. Heracles and Eurysthesus. Before Heracles was born, Zeus had once declared in the council of the gods that the first grandson of Perseus should rule over all of Perseus's other descendants. This distinction he intended for his and Alcmene's son. But Hera, who begrudged the son of her rival this honor, had recourse to trickery and saw to it that Eurystheus, who was likewise a grandson to Perseus, was born before Heracles. This made Eurystheus king of Mycenae in the land of the Argives, and the later born Heracles his subject. With growing concern, the ruler watched his young kinsman as he gained fame, and summoned him as a king summons his subjects to impose various labors upon him. Since Heracles would not obey, Zeus himself, who did not wish to oppose his own decree, commanded his son to serve the king of the Argives, and still he was reluctant to become the servant of a mortal. He went to Delphi to consult the oracle, which gave the answer that the gods would make amends for the supremacy Eurystheus had got through Hera's wiles, that Heracles would indeed have to perform 12 labors the king imposed upon him, but thereafter he would become immortal. The reply weighed on Heracles. To serve one beneath himself offended his pride, and it wounded his dignity, but he felt that it was unwise and not even possible to disobey Zeus his father. Hera, who still hated Heracles in spite of the aid he had given the gods, took advantage of this moment and changed his sullenness to savage frenzy. He became so utterly mad that he tried to murder his cherished nephew Iolaus, and when the boy managed to escape, he shot the children Megara had borne him, imagining that he was aiming his arrows at the giants. It was a long time before the madness left him, but when he realized his terrible mistake, he bowed down with grief, locked himself in his house, and refused to have anything to do with his fellow men. When time at last had lessened his sorrow, he resolved to accept the labors of Eurystheus, and went to him in Tiryns, which was part of his kingdom. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.